Good morning, students. Today is Tuesday, 31 August 2021. This is the second lecture that I will have posted for you. Today is one of the days we're supposed to be meeting in the classroom, but remember what I told you in my long letter of the 22nd of August, which is posted on Canvas. We're going to wait and see what the provost decides to do. He said that everyone must be tested by the 8th of September, and presumably he's going to be deciding what to do after that. Now, he may well decide to continue doing what we're supposed to be doing right now, which is meeting with half of our students each of the days we meet. So if we were to follow that plan, we would be meeting today in the classroom with half of you. Half of you would be there with me. And the other half would be meeting with me on Thursday, 2 days from now. But I decided that since it's only a 2-week period, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to record videos for you from home and post them on Canvas, and we will not meet in the classroom until at least the 9th of September. So just be patient. You can watch these videos as often as you want. And depending on what he decides, the provost, we may continue doing this with the exception that I will be in the classroom twice a week. So we'll wait and see what he decides on the 8th of September. Okay, I have my coffee here. Bear with me as I take a sip every now and then. So let's get started. Today I want to begin with some what I call odds and ends, and then we'll get into chapter 1. The first thing I want to do is remind you that I've posted a number of items already on Canvas. I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, I assume that you know how to go to Canvas, log in, and find this logic course. And once you're in the logic course of Canvas, look on the left side of the page. You'll see a number of words. Click on the word modules, and that will open up the items that I have posted. You will see those items on the page. And here's what's been posted already. First of all, the syllabus for the course, which is the first thing posted, and that will of course remain there all semester in case you need to check on something. You may already have printed the syllabus, which I've recommended, and that's fine. The second thing posted is what I call lecture schedule. And if you take a look at it, you'll see that today, for example, is listed as Tuesday, 31 August 2021, section 1.1. And that's what we're going to be covering today. So each time we meet, or each time I post a lecture, it will cover one section of the book. Not a whole chapter, just a section of a chapter. And since we have roughly 29 days to cover material this semester, we will get through much of the book. Not all of the book. I doubt that anybody ever covers this whole book in one semester. It's really meant for a 2-semester course in logic. So we'll cover much of it, probably at least half of it. Okay, the third thing posted is a set of solutions to chapter 1 of this book. After most of the sections, including this first section, there are exercises prepared for you by the author of the book, Patrick Hurley. So you should make sure that you take some time, work as many of the exercises as you can. It will help you do better on the exams. Now, exercises are something that you have to do. I can't do it for you. So work the exercises. It's going to take some time, and check your work. You can check your work either by looking in the back of the book, where about 1 in every 4 or 1 in every 5 exercises are solved, or looking at this handout that I posted for you. It's from Hurley. It's made available to instructors like me, and I'm making it available to you. So you can check your work in any of the exercises that you work. You can check that and see how you did. Now, if you miss a particular exercise, if you get it wrong, don't panic. That's expected. It's part of the learning process. If you get one wrong, go back and try to figure out why you missed it. And that means going back and looking at the book, first of all. Reread the appropriate section of the book, and in all likelihood, you will see why you missed it. If that doesn't help, you may want to go to my video lecture or to a handout that I prepared for you. If after you've tried all of those things, you still can't figure out why you missed it, send me an email and I'll explain it to you, or try to. Okay, so take those solutions seriously. I will post solutions for each of the chapters that we will be covering this semester. Okay? The fourth item posted on Canvas already is the letter that I wrote to you, the first letter that I sent to you by email. It was long and detailed, and so I thought it would be best to post it on Canvas so you can go back and reread it if you want to. It explains, at least as of the date I wrote the letter, it explains how we'll be doing things this semester, or at least until the provost decides what we're going to do going forward. And finally, I posted a logic dictionary that I have been compiling over the years. Many of the definitions are taken from various logic books that I own. Some of them I wrote myself. And even when I took definitions from the various books that I own, I often tinkered with them, added to them, changed certain things. So I put my touch on everything in it. And I think that may help you this semester. If you ever come across a term that's unfamiliar and you can't find a definition in the book that we're using, then go online to Canvas, click on that logic dictionary, and scroll through it until you find the word and see what it says there. Now, there may be a word you come across that's not in my logic dictionary. If so, why don't you send me an email and point that out to me? That would be useful to me. I may add it. Okay, so that's the reading list. That's what's posted so far. Now, there's also one video posted. I didn't mention that. That's the introductory video, the one I did the other day where we went over the syllabus. So today's video, once I get it posted, will be the second video so far. The next thing I want to mention is the book. I have my book here. Your book may look a little bit different. Your book may look just like the white part of this cover without the trim on the side here, the blue trim. But this is the book. You can see how thick it is. It's paperback. And I told you the other day in my video, you need to get that book and you need to get it right away. Some of you probably have it already. It should be available in the UTA bookstore. That would probably be the quickest way to get it. You may also want to order it online, but it may take a few days for it to come. So get the book as soon as you can, one way or another, and follow along in the readings. If you don't have the book yet, it won't hurt you to watch my videos. I will be quoting Hurley here and there, commenting on what he says, adding to it, and so on. In fact, you should think of this course as being co-taught. There are two teachers in this course, the author of our book, Patrick Hurley, and me. My job is to help you understand the book. And so I'll be following along pretty closely. Sometimes I will add things to what Hurley says. Sometimes I will post handouts to help you understand in a more detailed way the things that Hurley says in his book. I will never contradict Hurley. That would be confusing, right? If a student read a certain thing in Hurley and then heard me, the instructor, say something that conflicts with it, that would be very confusing for a student. So I try very hard never to do that. There may be cases where I disagree with Hurley or the way he explains something, but I'll try to minimize that. And if I ever do disagree with Hurley, I will tell you that I'm disagreeing and I'll explain why. But that'll be pretty rare. That'll rarely happen. Maybe it won't ever happen. Okay, the first section of chapter 1 is entitled, if you look at the first page, it's page 1 of the book. It's in a part of the book called Basic Concepts. In fact, chapter 1 is entitled Basic Concepts. And we're going to start today with section 1.1 of that chapter. And section 1.1 is entitled Arguments, Premises, and Conclusions. Now, these are three of the most important terms in logic. So we want to make sure we understand them. I want to make sure you understand them clearly before we move on to more complicated material. like any course that you take at UTA, you begin with basic things, including definitions of key terms, and then you build upon it. Each lecture builds upon what you have already learned. You'll be amazed at how much you know by the end of the semester, and you'll be amazed by what you can do. You will develop certain skills in this course, like proving propositions. You will learn how to construct truth tables and fill them in and get answers to your questions, such as whether a particular argument is valid or invalid. So the amount you know now compared to what you will know by the end of the semester will surprise you. It will be much, much greater. Now, what is a concept? A concept may be thought of as an idea. So we have an idea of an argument and of a premise and of a conclusion. Some ideas are said to be basic. Now think about that word. Basic is related to base. A base of something is the foundation. It's the thing, it's the most solid part. It's the part you build everything else on. Think of a house. A house has a foundation made out of concrete and rebar. It's made so that it will hold the structure up for a very long time. And if the foundation is faulty in some way, if it has a crack in it, or if it weakens or corrodes or becomes corrupted, then the whole house would come crumbling down. So a foundation or base of something is the most important part of it. What we're going to be learning now are some basic concepts. These are concepts that lie at the foundation of logic, and we'll keep coming back to them over and over again throughout the book. We'll be talking throughout the whole book about arguments and argument forms, and we'll learn a variety of different argument forms. We will learn how to prove that a particular conclusion follows from one or more premises. So we're going to learn some basic terms today, and then we'll build upon it in the days to come. So let's get started. I'm going to work my way through Hurley. I'm going to avoid confusing you, I'm going to read his definitions of the key terms, and I will, as I said, add to them as I go along, elaborate, give examples, and so on. Remember, my job is to help you understand what you've read in the book. Also, notice the structure of Hurley's book, or the layout. In the margins, which are quite wide, he has definitions. So if you look at page 2, and by the way, if you look closely at my book that I'm holding up, you can see that I write in it in various ways. I have used at least 2 highlighters, green and yellow, to highlight various words or phrases, to draw my attention to them. I have underlined, as I was reading it, I underlined certain words or phrases or entire sentences. And you can even see that I made diagrams over here on this page. You may not know what those diagrams mean, but I do. And later in the course, you will as well. So I'm constantly writing in my book in various ways. When you read something, especially a textbook like this, you should read it actively. Don't just read it and let it flow toward you. Engage it, right? Come toward it. Have a pen or a pencil in your hand, or at least a highlighter. Right? So when you're reading something, you should be pausing constantly to think about what is being said there, and make sure you understand it before you move on. This may surprise you, but I'm a very slow reader. I'm a voracious reader. I've been reading my whole life. I can't think of anything more enjoyable than reading. You can see some of my books in the background. That's probably 1/10 of the books that I own. I have bookshelves all over the house. I have boxes full of books. They're all over the place. I'm overwhelmed with books. Have I read all of them? Not at all. But that's not the point of a library. The point of a library is to have them there should you need them in a paper you're working on or project. Plus, I like collecting books. So, back to my point, I'm a slow reader. Even though I read a lot and constantly, I read slowly and carefully. I have trained myself when I'm reading never to move on until I understand what I've just read. Okay, there's kind of mindless reading. It's the kind of reading you might do while you're waiting in a doctor's office. You may pick up a Time magazine and flip through until you find something that's interesting and then kind of read it in a mindless way. You're not really paying attention to it. You're kind of listening for your name to be called. Don't read philosophy, especially logic, in that fashion. You've got to train yourself to read in a careful and slow way. Make sure you're trying to comprehend everything before you move on. Okay, so in the margins of his book, Hurley has placed definitions. So on page 2, you'll see that he has the following definitions from top to bottom. He defines the word logic in the left margin, then the word argument, the word statement, the words truth value, the word premises, and the word conclusion. On page 3, he defines the term conclusion indicator. On page 4, he defines the term premise indicator. So one nice thing about this book, one of the things I like about it, is that Hurley carefully defines his terms, and that helps the reader by setting them aside. Okay? They're also in the text, but in addition, he puts them in the margin for quick reference. So let's work our way through this section of the book. It really contains just 4 pages, 2 through 5. I should point out that at the end of this section, Hurley has included something he calls note on the history of logic, and it goes on for a couple of pages. Now, I'm not going to test you on that, but I would hope that you would be interested enough in the history of logic to read that. In that short section, Hurley describes some of the main logicians and what kind of logic they created or worked on. It should be of interest to you, at least as you're embarking on this course, on this new course. All right, so with all that said, let's get started on the top of page 2. Page 2. What is logic? You signed up for this course in logic. I assume you have some idea of what it involves, and maybe you have some misconceptions about logic. And I should point out that logicians define the term logic in different ways. That may shock you or at least surprise you. I pointed that out on my syllabus. But most logicians would say that logic has something to do with arguing or inferring. It has something to do with the relation between propositions. So here's how Hurley defines it. And I think it's a pretty good definition. It's not the only way to define the term, but it's a pretty good one. He says, logic may be defined as the organized body of knowledge or science that evaluates arguments. Now, don't be thrown off by the word science. You know various sciences such as chemistry, physics, linguistics, geology, and things like that. Each of those is a distinct science. Many sciences are empirical. They involve making observations of the world and then formulating hypotheses or theories to help explain what is observed. Okay, so that's the ordinary use of the word science. But if you look up the word science in a dictionary, you'll find that it has broader, more generic meanings than that. And Hurley has chosen to use the word science in that broad way. Science is an organized body of knowledge about something. So that term is broad enough to include chemistry and physics and geology and biology, but it also includes things like logic, because what you'll be learning in here is a whole body of knowledge over this course, an organized body of knowledge. So logic really is a science in the broad sense. It's not a science in the same way that geology is a science, but it's a science in the broad sense of being an organized body of knowledge. What is the knowledge about? Well, it's not about stones and rocks and the Earth's crust and things like that. That's what geology is about. Logic is about arguments. As Hurley puts it, it's the science that evaluates arguments. Now, what does it mean to evaluate? To evaluate means to make a value judgment about something. And we make evaluations every day. We describe people as good parents. We say so-and-so is a good parent or a bad parent. We say that a particular president is a good president or a bad one. We use the terms good and bad to apply to just about any object. This computer mouse that I'm holding up, right? I say it's a good computer mouse. What do I mean by that? I mean, it serves its purpose. Right? It was created for a purpose, and it serves that purpose well. So I call it a good mouse. And it holds its charge. And I have to charge it up every so often. Or in this case, I think I have to put batteries in this one. Some of my computer mice or mouses, I'm not sure what the plural is. The one I have downstairs on my desktop computer is wireless. So once a month I have to plug it in and charge it up. So if I had a mouse that failed to hold a charge, I would say, bad mouse. That's a bad mouse. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. So what is it that makes an argument good or bad? That's what we're going to be learning in this course. I'm not going to try to answer it now, but I want you to know that logic is the science that evaluates arguments. It classifies arguments as good, puts them into the good category, or bad. Every argument is good or bad, and this course will help you distinguish between the two. It'll give you some tools and techniques and methods so that you can determine for any given argument you come across whether it's good or bad. And that's a useful thing because arguments are important in our lives. So what is the aim of logic according to Hurley? He says in a couple of lines below what I just read, the aim of logic is to develop a system of methods and principles that we may use as criteria for evaluating, there's that word again, the arguments of others, and as guides in constructing arguments of our own. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Our knowledge of arguments and what makes them good and bad has two main uses. One is so that we can evaluate other people's arguments. Suppose someone's trying to persuade me to vote for him or her. A politician approaches me and says, I'd like your vote. And I say, why? Why should I vote for you as opposed to someone else or not at all? That person will then provide me with reasons. You should vote for me for this reason and also this other reason. Now, those reasons may not even be relevant to the conclusion that I should vote for that person. What if the person says, you should vote for me because I'm a Christian? I may say, that seems irrelevant to whether I should vote for you. Things that would be relevant are, what will your policies be? If elected, what will you do or try to do? Why is your being a Christian relevant to that? Okay? Someone might argue that being Christian is relevant to whether people should vote for that person. So I could imagine a long, complicated argument to that effect. But my first impression is, you better persuade me that your being a Christian is relevant to my voting for you. Because it doesn't seem to be relevant to me, and that means your argument is a bad one. You're giving me reasons that don't support your conclusion that I should vote for you. So people are trying to persuade us every day to buy products, to vote for him or her, to donate money for this cause or to that candidate or some other candidate. We need to be able to resist these appeals, these arguments that are made to us. You don't want to be bowled over, do you? If you don't know what distinguishes a good argument from a bad argument, you may find yourself persuaded by bad arguments. And that's humiliating, right? That's embarrassing. Nobody wants to be persuaded by a bad argument. Now, it's okay to be persuaded by a good argument. I've been persuaded many times in my life. I may have started reading a book or article on a certain topic, and I may have had certain views already when I started. By the time I finish reading the book or article, I may find that I have a different view of the matter. And you could say that the author of the book or article has persuaded me to change my mind, to change my beliefs, and maybe to change my behavior. So there's nothing in general wrong with being persuaded by someone's argument, but it should be a good argument that persuades you, not a bad argument. If you study logic, then you will be better equipped to distinguish between the good ones and the bad ones, and to make sure that you're not persuaded by a bad argument. You need to resist bad arguments. The other main use of knowledge of arguments is you are going to be making arguments throughout the course of your life. In your job, for example, you may need to persuade your colleagues. Suppose you're part of a software team and you are developing new software. You may believe that a particular approach is preferable to some other approach that's been suggested. You will then need to persuade your colleagues who are working on your project to go with your approach rather than the other approach. So you need to be able to put together good arguments to persuade other people. You may go into politics. You may therefore need to persuade people to vote for you, donate money for you, work for you, and so on. You may go into commerce. You may become a salesperson or go into marketing. You need to learn how to persuade people to buy your product, whether it's a good or a service. So I think of arguing as being both a shield and a sword. Let me back up. Knowledge of logic is both a shield and a sword. It's a shield because you can shield yourself from bad arguments. It's a sword, sorry for the military metaphor, it's a sword in the sense that you are going out into the world and making arguments to try to persuade people to believe things and do things. And you want to be good at it. You want to be able to persuade. And the way to persuade is to make good arguments. So there's no doubt in my mind that studying logic is beneficial to people. You will benefit from the study of logic. You may not see it at first. You may not see it as we go along, but later on in your life, I think you'll look back and say, the skills that I acquired in that logic course that I took with Keith have served me well. I still make use of some of the techniques that I learned in that course. I'm much more aware of arguments being made, and I'm much better equipped to evaluate them as good or bad arguments. So what is an argument? Let's look at Hurley's definition. An argument, he says on page 2, is, in its simplest form, a group of statements, one or more of which, and these are called the premises, are claimed to provide support for or reasons to believe one of the others, the conclusion. So there's a lot going on in here. We've got new terms being introduced. We've got the term statements, the term premises, the term conclusion. All of those terms are used in defining the term argument. So let's go back and I'll put it in slightly different words. An argument is a group of two or more statements, and we'll define that in a moment. One of those statements is the conclusion of the argument, and that's the statement that you're trying to establish or persuade someone to believe. Okay, that's the conclusion. That's the thing you're driving toward. The other statement or statements, there could be just one or more than one, they're called premises. The premises of an argument are the reasons that you give to support your conclusion. They provide the evidence or the grounds or the basis for the conclusion. So an argument is not just a randomly selected group of statements. It's a group of statements that has an internal structure. One of those statements, the conclusion, is singled out. That's the one you're trying to get the other person persuaded of. All the other statements that make up the argument are designed to support that one, and they are called the premises. So every argument has exactly one conclusion. right? There's a one-to-one correspondence between arguments and conclusions. If you have an argument, it's got to have a conclusion, or it wouldn't be an argument. If there's a conclusion, then that implies that there's an argument. It's the conclusion of some argument. There can, however, be more than one premise. Some arguments have just one premise. They have one premise followed by a conclusion. Other arguments have two premises, which are claimed to support the conclusion. And you could theoretically have an argument with a million or a billion premises. There's no top limit. Obviously, if we had an argument with a million premises, it would take forever just to read the premises or write them. So, practically speaking, arguments have a small, manageable number of premises. But theoretically, an argument could have an unlimited number of premises, a million or a billion or more. Do you see the difference? I'm distinguishing between theory and practice. In theory, there could be a million premises. In practice, there have to be far fewer than that, so we can comprehend them and understand them and write them down and read them. Okay, so practically speaking, you'll have a small number. The typical argument that you'll see in this book and in this course will have 2 or 3 premises at the most, sometimes just one. Now, a moment ago, when I defined the term argument, I pointed out that we use the word statement. So what is a statement and what does it differ from? Hurley defines a statement in the middle of page 2 as follows. A statement is a sentence that is either true or false. In other words, typically a declarative sentence or a sentence component that could stand as a declarative sentence. So he gives some examples of statements. Here they are. Someone might say, chocolate truffles are loaded with calories. That's a simple declarative sentence, and it makes a statement. And notice, it is either true or false. I don't know offhand whether it's true or false. Hurley may tell us. I think he says it's true, but that's not part of my knowledge. I don't know what chocolate truffles are, really. If it's some kind of chocolate, probably it does have a lot of calories, just based upon my knowledge of chocolates. But the point I'm making is not whether it's true, or actually false. The point I'm making is that if it's a statement, it's got to be one or the other. Every statement is either true or false. That's part of the nature of a statement. Another example, melatonin helps relieve jet lag. Another one, political candidates always tell the complete truth. Now that one is pretty clearly false. It's a strong statement. When you make a statement that strong, it takes only one example to falsify it. So when this says political candidates always tell the complete truth, all it would take is one political candidate who doesn't tell the complete truth on even one occasion. That would be enough to falsify it. So I suspect that that's false, as a matter of fact. Okay, so those are some examples of statements. Here are some examples of propositions that are not statements. A question is not a statement. If I say to you, what day is it? Or when do the Cowboys play their first game this season? I'm not making a statement. I'm not asserting something that's true or false. I'm trying to get some information from you. I'm assuming it's a sincere question. Do you know when the Cowboys play? Or on what date do the Cowboys begin their season? I may genuinely not know and want information from you. So a question is an example of a sentence that's not a statement. What if I said, hooray? What if I'm watching a game and I say, yay, or hooray, or boo? I'm uttering a sentence in English, but it has no truth value. It's not true or false that boo. It's not true or false that hooray. So those are just exclamations. They have no truth value. They are not statements. So language, in this case the English language, contains statements, it contains questions, exclamations, and lots of other things. Directives. What if I say to you, please close the door? I'm not making a statement. I'm not making an assertion about how the world is. I'm trying to get you to change the world by closing the door. So there are at least 4 different sentences that we've brought up so far. Some sentences are statements. They have truth values. Some sentences are questions. They have no truth values. Some statements are directives. They have no truth values. They're attempts to get the world to change. And then there are exclamations, which have no truth values. So a statement necessarily has a truth value. It's either true or false. We may not know what that truth value is. A moment ago I said I wasn't sure whether chocolate truffles, the sentence, chocolate truffles are loaded with calories, is true or false. Right? Other people might know that immediately because people's knowledge differs. I know things you don't. You know things I don't. That's a typical occurrence. I know all kinds of things about baseball and cycling because I'm interested in them. You may not know the first thing about baseball. You may know things about, gardening that I don't know about. So that's what makes life interesting, is different people are interested in different things. They accumulate knowledge and experience about different things, and we share it with each other. We learn from each other. Okay, let's move on. We were just talking about statements being either true or false. Let's give a name to that. Let's call them truth values. Every statement, by definition, has a truth value. That's part of the definition of a statement. What are the truth values? There are just 2. We're going to assume there are just 2 truth values in this course. Now you may be wondering, well, could there be a third? Well, yes. There are types of logic that are very abstract, and they say that there are more than 2 truth values. There could be true, false, and something else. But we're going to simplify things in this course. Let's just assume from now on that there are only 2 truth values, true and false. So, true is a truth value. False is also a truth value. Some statements are true. They have the truth value true. Some statements are false. They have the truth value false. So I know it sounds odd to say that false is a truth value, but you're just going to have to accept that oddity, that odd way of speaking. 2 truth values, true and false. Every statement, by definition, has one of those truth values, and no statement has both. No statement is simultaneously true and false. That would be crazy. That would be absurd. Imagine saying it's both true and false that the Cowboys begin their season on the 9th of September. It's true that the Cowboys begin their season on the 9th of September, and it's false that the Cowboys begin their season on the 9th of September. Well, it can't be both. It can be one or the other. In fact, it has to be one or the other, but it cannot be both. Now, we'll talk more about these 2 principles later. They're called the principle or law of excluded middle and the principle or law of non-contradiction. So I'm giving you the kind of discursive definition right now. Later, we'll look at the technical names for those definitions. Okay, so Hurley says near the bottom of page 2, questions, proposals, suggestions, commands, and exclamations have no truth values. They are therefore not statements. Okay, so we've defined a number of terms already on page 2. Let's move on to page 3. Hurley gives examples of arguments. Here's a particular argument that he came up with. Top of page 3. All film stars are celebrities. All film stars are celebrities. That's the first premise. Second premise, Halle Berry is a film star. Conclusion, therefore, Halle Berry is a celebrity. Now, you may not know offhand whether that's a good or a bad argument, but we're going to learn techniques that will help you see that that is a good argument. That's called a valid argument. And we'll learn the definition of the term valid later. But for the moment, let's just say it's a good argument. Right? The premises really do support the conclusion. But if you go down below that, you'll see an example of a bad argument. It says, some film stars are men. Cameron Diaz is a film star. Therefore, Cameron Diaz is a man. You may not know offhand whether that's a good or a bad argument, but again, you'll be learning techniques to help you determine that that's a bad argument. It's called invalid. What that means is that even if those two premises are true, the conclusion may be false. The truth of the premises is compatible with the falsity of the conclusion. And that's bad in an argument. The whole point of an argument is to state premises that guarantee the truth of the conclusion. Okay, so that's a bad argument. I'm not going to tell you exactly why right now because we're going to be learning the techniques later. All Hurley is doing for the moment is giving you examples of good and bad arguments. Now, if you're presented, let me take a sip of coffee. Suppose you are presented with a written or spoken passage, which means, by passage I mean a collection of sentences in a language like English. You will have to determine at the outset whether that passage expresses an argument. It may or may not. It may be something other than an argument. It may be simply a group of sentences put together to describe something in detail. That's not an argument. It may be a group of sentences put together to explain how to do something, like change a tire. I could write up a paragraph explaining how to change a tire, or maybe more than one paragraph. It may take longer than a paragraph. I would say, first you do this, then do this, and so forth. So not all passages contain arguments. Thank goodness, right? We use language for lots of purposes, not just arguing. There's nothing wrong with arguing, but thank goodness we have lots of other things to do with our words. So you may be in a position of having to determine whether a particular passage you're confronted with contains an argument. How do you determine that? Well, one way, not the only way, but one way is to look for certain words in that passage. Certain words are said to be conclusion indicators. Other words are said to be premise indicators. Notice the word indicator. That means the occurrence of a certain word indicates that it may be a conclusion or probably is a conclusion, but there's no guarantee of it. Right? If there were, then we wouldn't call them indicators. We would call them guarantors. Right? We would say, here's a list of conclusion guarantors, meaning if these words appear, they are guaranteed to signal that the conclusion is coming. But they're not guarantors. They're only indicators. So you still have to make a judgment, even if you see these words. What are some of the words? If you look at page 3, in the middle of the page, Hurley has a list, a fairly long list, of what he calls conclusion indicators. So here are the words you should look for if you're presented with a passage, a written or spoken passage, and you're wondering whether it contains an argument. Look for the word therefore. Now, if you see the word therefore, that's a good indication. Notice that word indication. It's a good indication that you have yourself an argument, that there's an argument being expressed in that passage. Other words are wherefore, that's kind of old-fashioned. Thus, you see that quite a bit. Someone may say, blah, 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 thus, so-and-so, right? The word thus functions usually as a conclusion indicator. That means that what follows that word is probably the conclusion. Not guaranteed to be, but probably is. Other words on the list are consequently, we may infer, accordingly, we may conclude, and so forth. I'm not going to read all of them, but there are a number of conclusion indicators in English. And people who make arguments tend to use those words, some of those words. And one reason you use those words is you want your audience, whoever you're talking to or writing for, you want them to understand that you are making an argument. So you naturally would use words like therefore or thus to convey to your reader or hearer. All right, turn to page 4. You'll see at the top of the page, Hurley has a list of premise indicators. These are words or phrases that indicate that what follows it are premises, or what follows it is a premise. These are words like since. I may say blah, 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 since so-and-so. Okay? What follows the word since is, in all likelihood, the premise. And the first part, therefore, would be the conclusion, the blah, blah, blah part. In fact, here's an example. Instead of using blah, 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 look at Hurley's example. Expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs, comma, since the use of these drugs can jeopardize the development of the fetus. Now, if someone said that, if someone spoke that to you, imagine what you would think. The person says, expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs. You're thinking, why not? Right? That's the natural thought process. You hear that and you're thinking, why not? Well, the person goes on to give you the reason. Since the use of these drugs can jeopardize the development of the fetus. So in that case, the person making the argument states the conclusion right up front and then tells you the reason that supports it. And the word since is put in there to make it clear to the listener or reader what the premise is that supports that conclusion. So oddly enough, sometimes when we're arguing, we state the conclusion first. Sometimes we state the premises first. Okay, I had to check something. I started to panic thinking that maybe I didn't turn the video on, but it looks like it's recording, so I don't want to lose a whole video. So there's a list of premise indicators at the top of the page. Now you may be wondering, do I have to memorize these lists? Sad to say, from your point of view, yes you do. All of these definitions are fair game. I will test you thoroughly on the definitions of key terms. I may, for example, say on the exam, which of the following terms is not a premise indicator? And there will be 4 choices, A, B, C, and D, and you'll have to look at them. You'll probably, in a couple of cases, say, well, that one clearly is a premise indicator, and so is that one. And that will leave you 2 choices, and you'll have to look at them carefully and determine which of the other ones is which of the other ones is and which one is not a premise indicator. So I can test your knowledge of these indicator words in that way. So make yourself familiar with them, commit them to memory. Your memory, I should tell you, is far more capacious than you may think it is. People tend to underestimate their powers of memory. I think if I told you, take a look at page 4. This is terrible to say, but suppose I had power over you and I said, unless you memorize all of page 4 in the next 2 weeks, I will put you to death. Could you do it? You could, and you would. If there's enough at stake, you will apply yourself and you will memorize it. There are reports of people memorizing whole passages of the Bible or the Quran or some other long document. In fact, I seem to recall that someone had memorized the entire Quran. Now, it seems impossible to me. My memory isn't that good, but maybe someone has a memory that good. I do know that when I was a child, I memorized everything. I was like a sponge. I memorized the presidential oath of office. I used to recite it. My mother would tell people, Keith knows the presidential oath of office. Tell him, Keith, and I would recite it. It got boring after a while. I knew all of the presidents in order George Washington, John Adams, and all the way through up to the current president. I knew all the capitals of the states, and I could just remember everything. As I've gotten older, I found that I no longer know the capitals of the states, which is interesting. How do you forget something like that? Well, I think what happened is this. When you get older, when you're a kid, you don't know much about the states and the various cities. You don't know the history of the state or the city. It's easy just to associate a state with a city, not knowing anything else about them. But as you grow up, you learn about cities like Little Rock, Arkansas. And you learn that some cities are more important than others. For example, in Texas, Houston and San Antonio are very big in terms of population, and very powerful, very populous cities, among the biggest in the country. Austin is not as large, I'm pretty sure, and yet Austin is the capital of Texas. So you may forget that a small town or a medium-sized city is the capital of a state, because you've learned that Houston is economically a powerhouse. It has the oil industry and NASA and shipping and things like that. So my point is that when you're a child, your memory is very capacious. You're able to memorize a lot. You're still young. You're not nearly as old as I am. You can easily remember or commit to memory all of these definitions. How can you do that? The best way I can think of, and I highly recommend this, is to buy some flashcards. You know, the little index cards. Some of them are 3x5, others are 4x6. Get some flashcards, and as you proceed through the book, whenever you see a term defined in the left margin, as Hurley does, write it on one side of a card, like conclusion, turn the card over, and write the definition of that term on the other side. And yes, you should write them. The act of writing these definitions out is part of the learning process, part of the memorizing process. Now, as you go through the course, your stack of cards is going to get bigger, because you'll get every section of every chapter will have more terms for you to memorize. So once you get started on this process, you should carry the cards around with you, put a rubber band around them, and carry them around with you, put them in your backpack or wherever. And if you're driving to and from campus, you may want to put them on the console of your car. And as you're driving along, just glance down at the top card. If you see the word conclusion, as you're driving, paying attention to the road, of course, you should try to formulate the definition in your mind. Okay, conclusion. What is the conclusion? Oh, that's the part of an argument that is supported by the other parts of the argument, the premises. Okay, the conclusion is the statement or proposition that you are claiming to support when you make an argument. So try to formulate the definition in your mind. When you think you have it right, reach down and turn the card over and check to see. If you get it right, put the card on the bottom of the stack and move on to the next one. Just keep cycling through them whenever you get a few minutes. If you state the definition and you turn the card over and you missed it, turn it back over and try it again. And keep going until you get it right. Only when you get it right should you put the card at the bottom of the stack and go on to the next one. Now, I know some of you are thinking, you're rolling your eyes and you're saying, this is so childish. This is the kind of thing kindergartners do, or fifth graders. And I'm a college student. Well, don't think like that. I went to law school with the aim of becoming an attorney. The amount of information you must commit to memory to take a bar exam is shocking. It's astounding. You will not believe you could possibly remember it all, but you will. You will. And one way you will is by making flashcards. I had huge stacks of flashcards for all of my law courses. In fact, I memorized them so well that many of them I still remember to this day. I've been unable to forget them. I can tell you, for example, the common law of burglary, right, which I had typed on a card, the definition on the other side. Burglary at common law is defined as the breaking and entering of a dwelling place in the nighttime with the specific intent to commit a felony or petty larceny therein, period. I've been unable to forget that. I don't need to remember that, but I do. Right? Once you commit something to memory, you may be stuck with it forever. Now, that's not a reason not to memorize stuff. You need to memorize stuff for the short run, and if it sticks with you the rest of your life, so be it. I haven't been harmed in any way by remembering the definition of the common law word burglary. Okay, so I wanted to get that in at some point. Make flashcards. It's the best way to learn the terminology of the field you're studying. And this, of course, is logic. This is our field. Okay, now Hurley goes on in the remainder of this chapter to make some interesting points. Not every passage that you're confronted with, and I mentioned this earlier, contains an argument or expresses an argument. Sometimes we write descriptions or explanations. Sometimes it's just free association. Sometimes we're narrating. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So we do all kinds of writing and speaking. Only some of it, thank goodness, is arguing. It could also be that you have a particular passage, and it does express an argument, but there may be statements in that passage that are neither premises of the argument nor the conclusion of the argument. Not everything in a written argumentative passage is part of the argument. Hurley points that out. All right. Sometimes we put in illustrations or explanations in addition to premises and conclusions. So read Hurley's discussion of those important points on pages 4 and 5. I want to end today with a couple of additional terms. Hurley, almost as an afterthought, mentions the word inference on page 5. It's an important word. I don't know why he didn't define it in the margin. He says an inference in the narrow sense of the term is the reasoning process expressed by an argument. And I pointed this out on the syllabus. If you go back and read my syllabus, you'll see I made this distinction very clearly between an argument and an inference. Let me repeat it briefly for you. Inference is something that goes on in our heads. It's a psychological process. I infer a statement from one or more other statements. Right? That's a process going on in my mind or in my head, if you will. I draw an inference. I'm inferring something from something else. Okay, that's the main way we use the term inference. I drew an inference. Right? That was a mental process I underwent. Hurley points out that we can also use the word inference as a synonym for argument. Here's what he says. In the broad sense of the term, inference is used interchangeably with the word argument. So he's simply pointing out that the word inference has a narrow meaning and a broad meaning. In the narrow sense, it refers to the process going on in your head when you draw a conclusion from one or more premises. But in the broad sense, we can, if we wish, use the term inference as a synonym for the word argument. We can use the two words interchangeably. He also mentions the word proposition. You may have noticed I slipped up a couple of times and I used the word proposition today when I meant statement. And the reason for that is most philosophers use the terms interchangeably. They treat them as though they mean the same thing. So sometimes in this course I will talk about statements. Sometimes I'll use the term propositions. I'll try to stick with statement to avoid confusion. But in other logic books that I've used, the authors use the word proposition throughout the book. Hurley tends to use the word statement. So he says on page 5, a proposition in the narrow sense is the meaning or information content of a statement. So in the narrow sense, the two terms are not identical. They're not equivalent. They're not synonymous. But for the purposes of this book, Hurley points out, the two terms will be used interchangeably. So that's nice. From your point of view, whenever you see the term statement or proposition in this book from now on, just remember Hurley has told us that they mean the same thing. Sometimes he uses the word statement, sometimes he uses the word proposition. Okay, so read over the note on the history of logic. I won't test you on it, but I recommend that you read it. And then get to work on the exercises. Starting on page 7, there are exercises that involve identifying arguments in written passages and looking for indicator words like thus and therefore and since and because. So try to figure out what the argument is in these passages and then check your work either by going to the back of the book or looking at the solutions that I've posted on Canvas for you. By the way, it looks like Hurley answers roughly every third exercise in the back of the book. So if you look for the star, look at page 7 in exercise set 1, you'll see that exercise 1 has a star, kind of a brown star by it. Exercise 4 has a star, 7, 10, 13, 16. It looks like Hurley went through and he solved every third exercise in the back of this book. The ones that don't have a star require that you're going to have to go look at the solutions that I posted for you on Canvas. Okay, so today's lecture is taken just over an hour. I'm about to stop it. It'll take a little while to upload it and get it processed, but soon, sometime today, I'll send you an email saying my lecture for today is posted. Then that will tell you that you can go to Canvas and watch it. And the nice thing about these videos is that you can watch them as many times as you need, or parts of them as many times as you need. You can also skip through the videos. Unlike in a lecture in the classroom, if what I'm currently talking about is boring and you already understand it, wouldn't it be nice if you could fast forward the instructor in your course? Well, obviously you can't do that, but you can do that with a video. So that's a nice feature of it. Okay, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover today. I'll tell you a little bit about Hurley next time. I was going to do that today, but we can save that for next time. Just a little biographical information about the author of our book. After all, you're going to be spending some time with him this semester, so it might be nice to know a little bit about him. Where did he get his degrees, and how old is he? Where did he teach? That sort of thing. Okay, I'm going to stop this video now and get it processed, and your next lecture will be in a couple of days.